Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Conduct Detrimental Podcast. This is your co-host, Dan Worley. I'm joined, as just about always, Dan's missed one, so I can't say always anymore. Just about always, Dan Wallach. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing well, Dan. I do have a 99% attendance rate. Happy Friday. Looking forward to this episode. And on the 1-year anniversary of the Deflategate oral argument at the Second Circuit, which I attended 1 year ago. So it was a big day on March 3rd, 2015. But we have a big day today on Conduct Detrimental named after Deflategate. Yes. A bigger day, potentially. So, Dan, will you do the honors?
Sure. We welcome Justin Fielkow today, who's a friend of ours, as well as a lawyer at the Franklin Law Group in Chicago, where he focuses. He's a litigator who focuses on sports law, and also, sports betting, fantasy sports, or kind of some other niche issues that he practices in. Dan and I have both spoken on panels with him before, as well as Justin and I and our other colleague, Andrew Sensi, have recently, or I guess it hasn't come out just yet, but we wrote a law review article for the DePaul Law Review on sports betting. So, Justin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen.
Yeah, you better hope that article comes out soon. The law might change within a couple of months.
We're pushing.
We definitely already kicked it down the can a few times kicked our deadlines down in order to try and get as much info as we could in there, and we're still always behind the times, it appears.
Yeah. So that sports betting will be for another day, but today we really wanted to discuss some sports ticketing issues, which is something we haven't really talked about on this podcast to date. But Justin wrote for the Sports Esquires. He wrote a really good article on some new legislation coming out called the BOTS Act, which stands for the Better Online Ticket Sales Act. And so I guess a good place to start, Justin, is, what really is the problem that's out there right now in broad strokes that this law and others out there are really aiming to stop or help or fix?
Sure. Well, in broad strokes, one of the large issues that have not necessarily recently arisen, but have become a little more prominent in the media, is the fact that there is a lack of availability to the general public of tickets at face value. And one of the large reasons why we've seen this issue arise is the growing trend among ticket brokers in using automated ticket purchasing software, or in other words, ticket bots, to purchase large blocks of tickets to concerts and sporting events at face value, with the end goal of reselling them at a higher price.
Yeah, how do these bots work? I mean, is it computerized, automated thing where, or are we talking about a broker that has access to 100 employees and they dial up at the same time? How prominent are the use of these bots at the point of sale?
Fairly prominent. I think there was a little bit of a study, but in 2013, Ticketmaster estimated that bots sometimes purchase more than 60% of tickets for a given event. And you've seen this, like I said, it's been happening for a while. It's the use of electronic means. It's usually a computer software that you can attach and that will handle the actual purchase. But you've seen it rise to popularity and become the attention of the media with shows like Hamilton, for example, where tickets in New York were selling for 15 times their original price, and normal everyday consumers missed out on the opportunity to purchase these tickets at face value because automated bots snatched them up in huge blocks, and then the resale prices have been through the roof. On the sports side, again, looking at New York as well, UFC 205, which was the first mixed martial arts fight ever held at Madison Square Garden, original face value tickets were made available to the public from as low as $106. But the average resale asking price in the secondary market was $2,000. And some tickets were even listed, not necessarily sold, but they were listed at $25,000 just for this one event. And with certain events being far more popular than others, it incentivizes the use of these bots to purchase as many tickets as possible and resell them through secondary markets.
So do we have a sense of like, I get that, they may buy a ticket for $1,000 and sell it for $25,000. I mean, that's obviously an extreme example, it seems like, but do we have a sense of how much scalpers are making based on the use of these bots, and like how much this little trick that they're doing is really profiting for them?
It's difficult to say how much each individual scalper or groups of scalpers are making, but what we can pretty affirmatively say is that consumers are the ones who end up in many situations being the ones who pay the price, because
Right.
they're the ones who the only available tickets to them are the marked up prices.
Well, I mean, how does this work? I mean, when the bots are implemented at the point of sale, I mean, the ticket brokers are able to have access to hundreds of tickets at one time. Are they able to pick and choose which of those ticket orders they want to process to payment? Because I would imagine they're picking up a lot of crap tickets at the same time that they're also cherry picking some of the premium seats in the house.
Well, you have to understand, I mean, when using these type of programs, you're largely going to focus on events where even as you say, the crap tickets are still going to sell for a markup. You're not, it would make very little sense to purchase not to point out somewhere like Pittsburgh, but a Pittsburgh Pirates game on a Tuesday afternoon, the resale market's going to be really low. You would imagine that using bots for purchasing of that tickets is something that would not occur. But for situations like Hamilton and big events, maybe the Super Bowl is a bad example because there's so few tickets actually made available to public. But again, like UFC 205, where where the vast majority of tickets were publicly available, the general public just doesn't stand a chance when mere minutes, heck, even seconds after tickets go on sale, the use of these automated bots purchase the vast majority of them. And so the only way to purchase tickets then is through a secondary market.
So what does the federal law set out to do to change this, disparity between the consuming public and ticket brokers?
Sure. So what the federal law goal is, it's, excuse me, it specifically is geared towards ensuring, this is quote unquote ensuring, this is the White House press release, that it ensures equitable consumer access to tickets for certain events. The New York Senator Chuck Schumer, who really was one of the driving forces behind this bill, put it a little more bluntly, quote unquote, saying by eliminating bots and slapping hackers with hefty fines, we can better ensure those who want to attend shows in the future will not have to pay outrageous, unfair prices. So in other words, the goal is to simply make it that there are cheap face value, not necessarily cheap, but face value tickets available to the general public more so than currently exist, particularly for high demand events.
Does it ban the practice entirely?
Yeah, so that's the thing. Here's the law attempts to do it like this. What it does now is it makes it illegal to use software such as bots to bypass consumer security systems that are designed to limit ticket sales. So, for example, on a site like Ticketmaster, its terms of service expressly state, it sets out limitations on the number of tickets. It expressly states that you can't use bots, you can't use automated software in order to purchase tickets. However, that's often difficult to do. The law makes it illegal now, not just as a violation of the conditions of a particular site, but it actually makes it illegal to conduct that particular activity, e.g. using the ticket bots to purchase tickets to these events. It also makes it illegal to actually resell any tickets that were bought with the help of a ticket bot. So it's not simply just the purchase of them, but also then reselling where you knowingly those tickets were actually purchased through a bot. What it does is it now treats violations of the act, any use of these bots where it's prohibited, as an unfair, deceptive act or practice under the Federal Trade Commission Act, and it provides authority to the FTC and the states to enforce violations, and often it can lead to, like Chuck Schumer said, fairly hefty fines.
But you're saying that this is almost like a civil enforcement action? There are no criminal penalties associated with the act at all?
I'm not 100% sure if there are criminal, but I don't believe there are. I think this is really a civil enforcement act with the aim being deterrence. Now, one thing you got to understand, though, is actually a number of states already have laws on the books that address these practices. For example, New York actually passed legislation last November beefing up its own state laws against the use of ticket bots. And California and Florida already have penalties for violators, and they actually do provide for jail time in some of those situations. What the federal law, though, does is, it was likely passed in response to the now widespread public attention being paid to this issue with things like Hamilton and people not being able to purchase tickets. So really it gives it a little more teeth. It expands the jurisdiction, the authority of these states to pursue violations, not just strictly under state law, but under federal law as well. And they can now work with the FTC and enforcement actions.
So, it seems to me that the typical scalper, the stereotypical scalper is not, kind of a behind the scenes guy, maybe not, the most reputable personality. It seems to me there's going to be an enforcement issue here, and we've probably seen that already with the state law actions. What do you think about the ability for the FTC and the individual states to actually enforce this law that's out there?
I could not agree more. With some of the state laws, part of the problem has been jurisdictional issues, and not necessarily the legal authority to pursue someone who's out of state, because if they're conducting transactions in the state, they would have that authority. It's the practical efforts to pursue someone behind a computer who is not located in your state. It's often not worth the time and effort. The hope is, for at least why the passage of this law exists, was to provide a little more teeth by being able to work with someone like the FTC, who has a little farther reach than maybe resource limited states, to actually track and enforce, to track violators and actually enforce parts of the law. That said, it's really difficult to predict whether the FTC is going to have much of an appetite to actually expend resources on these often difficult to track, scalping activities. And even still, whether just because the states have laws and now have been authorized at the federal level to even pursue federal charges doesn't necessarily mean that they're still going to want to. So while this is a problem, this law still may have some very serious limitations, and it might in effect be more about publicity, maybe more about just simply acting as a deterrent, with maybe the prosecution of a case or two, rather than something that can be a true effective means of, mitigating or removing this practice.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Have we seen, I know this is basically brand new, but have we seen the FTC take any action to this point, or is it just kind of out there and we're waiting to see if something happens?
I haven't yet. One thing though that kind of limits even the ability of like the FTC is the fact that the government doesn't necessarily have unauthorized access to a private ticket seller's servers. And by that I mean Ticketmaster, for example, who actually purchases the tickets is not something that the FTC has access to. It's going to require the cooperation of, the primary and secondary ticket resellers, such as Ticketmaster, such as StubHub, to show that what they have required, what their requirements are, have been violated.
Yeah. And do they care?
And that's the thing.
Yeah.
I don't think they care.
They're making their money anyway, right? Why bother?
That's right. It's kind of they're almost required to self-report a problem, but they, at least in my view, it's almost as if they are fundamentally at odds at times with some of the best interests of the consumers. And that's because really a lot of these business models are based on service fees. They're based on percentage of resale value, and that's how they make their revenue. That's the business model. And so where would be your motivation to necessarily enforce this act if it reduces ticket turnover? To me, I think there might have been a better way to effectively craft this law. And that would have been to require primary or secondary sellers to make, technologically reasonable efforts to ban bots, rather than simply including it in your terms of service. Make real efforts to restrict bots. One thing, though, and one of the reasons why this law was passed pretty quickly, was that the primary and secondary resellers at least were publicly in favor of passage of the law. If they were the ones who now were actually required under law to shoulder the burden and maybe be the ones subject to potential penalties in addition of violators, they may have sang a different tune in terms of their support of the law. So I think it's an interesting situation with the added attention, but it's a very real question whether enforcement will have the desire, whether we will be able to achieve the desired effect from a consumer protection standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of so many different categories of abuses in the ticket selling marketplace. I mean, bots are a problem for those who seek fair access to tickets. But I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've got issues such as, the administrative fees, the service fees, the processing fees, sometimes approximate 1/4 of the face value of the ticket price. We have holds and pre-sales. The whole system is seemingly gamed against the consumer. I mean, so does this? I mean, this law may go far enough for bots, but what about other abuses in the ticketing system?
I think you've seen a little more civil action on that front. There have been some antitrust suits filed. One that comes to mind is out in California, a suit. Was it? I think it was against with the 49ers. It was about.
They're going to lose that because they're the 49ers. I mean, they are the whipping boy of the litigation system and on the football field. But tell me a little bit more about that case. I'm interested in that.
You're putting me on the spot a little bit here.
Don't worry. Move on.
I have not necessarily done enough research to be ready to talk about it for our podcast purposes right now.
There's another antitrust suit I know that another one in California where the Golden State Warriors partnered with Ticketmaster to make Ticketmaster the exclusive distributor of tickets. And StubHub and Ticketmaster, for those who don't know, there's no love lost between the two companies. I once was at a Sloan conference where they had the two general counsels up, and they were basically yelling at each other across the stage. But in any event, StubHub sued Golden State Warriors and Ticketmaster for an antitrust violation. It was kicked out of court, so I think we've seen an attempt to do that. I haven't seen a successful one yet, so I guess we'll have to
that one I'm a little more familiar with, and that was, what happened was StubHub basically sued Ticketmaster and the NBA team, the Golden State Warriors, who were, who had an agreement to use their services. And what it amounted to was that it would charge monopolistic practices. Essentially, the charge was StubHub accusing Ticketmaster of forcing fans to use its own secondary ticket service rather than giving them the freedom to use third-party platforms such as StubHub. The court ultimately ruled against StubHub, but like you said, it kind of does to a certain degree highlight the lack of love lost between the companies, and it highlights the difference between a primary and secondary seller. Ticketmaster is primarily what is called a primary seller. That means they partner with a team or a venue who then provides them the tickets to sell at face value. They get to charge a service fee while doing so to each of the consumers, but you only purchase tickets at face value. Whereas StubHub, it's tickets that were purchased elsewhere can be resold on their marketplace, basically for whatever consumer demand price will dictate. So it's there's a little bit of back and forth between the companies, and it's certainly kind of important to understand how exactly those type of markets work. But there's definitely a lot of overlap because StubHub's trying to get in as a primary seller. They're working with, I believe they just recently partnered with the Philadelphia Sixers to become the official ticketing partner of the Sixers and have the opportunity to sell directly face value tickets that were provided from the team.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some other interesting lawsuits we've seen out there too. I know, to me, the thing that's really driving these lawsuits is the advances in technology in the ticketing industry, which create issues. So the one that I'm specifically thinking of is the Minnesota Timberwolves moved to completely separate, and I think a lot of teams are doing this. They're not even printing paper tickets anymore. You have to have it on an app, and you can only sell it at the specific place that they allow you to sell it at. And what happened was a couple fans, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to do this on memory, but ended up suing the team because they were forcing them to resell their tickets through the team or the NBA website, and they couldn't even sell them for what they paid for them, and they thought if they could sell them through other venues, they'd be able to reclaim some of their costs back.
Right. I'm familiar with the suit. Yeah. And basically what occurred was, the Timberwolves and the NBA instituted policies that required fans to present verified electronic tickets on their mobile device, on their phone in order to gain entry into the stadium. But ticket holders, fans were, they complained that it unfairly restricted their ability to transfer resell tickets because it was on your phone and transfers were limited. Basically what they claimed was that, paperless ticketing platform, the use of a mobile phone was kind of an illegal constraint on their ability to do as they please with tickets that they received. I'm not sure if the case was actually decided, but they were the fans, the season ticket holders were actually probably facing a pretty steep uphill climb on that one. That's in large part because courts have generally viewed event tickets as a personal seat license that allows the holder of the ticket to enter the stadium and sit in a specific seat, but it's a license that is revocable and it can be taken away anytime from us, any reason, and there's no absolute right to transfer or resell that particular license. Yeah. So as much as, and frankly, the teams aren't doing this because they want to make it more difficult for fans to sell tickets. The more butts in a seat, the better the environment, for example. And that's something that has really been a focus of late for teams because it's so easy to watch a game on TV right now. Really, the concept of like paperless tickets, the online use is to protect consumers from fraudulent tickets. Right. It's so easy nowadays with the way you can edit PDFs that you could just create a really great looking fake ticket, sell it on Craigslist for what amounts to pure profit because all you had to do was print a piece of paper out. So it's, the teams are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place to a certain degree on some of these issues. And, really what they kind of have to do is, speak with fans, engage with fans about what may be the best way of handling things, though. You can only do so much to prevent litigation. As they say, it only takes one asshole, right?
Yeah, you mentioned paperless tickets. Now, one of the features of these paperless tickets is the non-transferability. I mean, you could basically eliminate so much of the secondary market by shifting to non-transferable paperless tickets. One, is that legal? And two, why don't more teams do that? Or does it only work with premium seating? Or is there pushback from the public on that? Because that would just tamp out the entire industry.
It's not completely limited. No, I'm a Cubs season ticket holder, and they've actually this year they're removing They're removing the print at home paper tickets. What we will be entitled to use is you actually get the hard copy tickets that the team prints. So those can be transferred. And you can still use the electronic tickets, but you have to transfer them online, either through a secondary seller, or you can send them to friends and family using the online system, and then they have to just pull it up on their phone. So it doesn't completely remove the ability to transfer.
No, what I'm getting at is to mandate a process like that to eliminate so much of the secondary market. I mean, as somebody,
teams have done that before.
Yeah, I mean, I go to concerts, and for certain of the premium seats in concerts, I know Bruce Springsteen, to some limited degree, instituted a policy like that with some of his shows a few years back. That if it's within the lower seating or on the floor, you'd have to swipe your credit card to be able to use the ticket. So it was non-transferable. You couldn't sell it or dispose of it, and brokers purchasing those tickets are stuck with them. So why don't promoters and venues begin instituting a non-transferable paperless ticket to kind of combat the illegal ticket selling practices?
I mean, I think to a certain degree, it's kind of as we discussed. It's still a license. It's not a absolute right to be able to do what you want with a ticket. You are just granted the ability to enter the stadium and sit in the seat. And if the ticket, if you dictate a policy where you state that it's a non-transferable license, well, you always have the option of not purchasing the ticket.
Yeah, and I think
it's not something that you're required to do. It's a privilege to a certain degree.
Like what we talked about. I mean, why would teams want to do that? Why do teams care about the secondary market, right? They're still getting their money. If they eliminate the secondary market, they may anger fans who now have a more difficult time of getting tickets or are unable to sell their own tickets. I think there may be pushback from fans. I think that I would not be super happy about that if I was a season ticket holder. And so I think that's definitely one concern that's out there. And just to close the loop on the Timberwolves case, another reason that consumers are put in a bad position, that case was actually sent to arbitration because there was an arbitration clause on the tickets themselves.
Sure.
That forced the case out of court, and then that also, I don't know the details of it, but probably the fans probably missed their time to file for arbitration. Is typically the case. They can put kind of a shorter window of time that they can sign up for arbitration. So another way that teams or companies that issue the tickets are taking advantage of the system in order to ultimately hurt consumers.
I get what the end game might be, but you also have to understand that really, if the goal is to protect consumers from being exposed to fraudulent activities, such as counterfeit tickets, it's a balancing act. Like I mentioned, teams and venues are often caught between a rock and a hard place, and really at a time where it's becoming increasingly popular to watch at home because of the quality of television right now. HD has made things remarkable. The number of cameras give you so many different angles and views and replay. You really have to find a way to enhance the in-stadium experience, and going hand in hand with that is making sure that people can, in a very safe, insulated environment, have access to tickets. And if that means restricting the ability to resell, that might just be a byproduct of the concept of protecting consumers from purchasing a ticket where they show up at the gate and they're rejected because what they encountered was something that was completely fake and counterfeit. So it's a difficult situation to a certain degree, where you're almost choosing to pick between two difficult decisions.
Right. Yep. I agree. And another issue that's out there, and we've seen a lawsuit about it as well, and the trend is now for teams, especially teams with new stadiums, is I guess not even a trend anymore, it's just sort of a standard, is to issue these personal seat licenses where you have to pay a substantial upfront cost in order to purchase the opportunity to buy season tickets for that seat for a certain number of years. I don't know if you're familiar with the St. Louis Rams case. I know that sounds like an antiquated name, but they are fans of the Rams that filed a lawsuit against the now Los Angeles Rams. And these fans had bought tickets, I think dating back all the way to 1995, with their license gave them the right to purchase tickets for 30 years. It would be to 2025. And now the LA Rams, are not allowing them to buy tickets for those same seats when the team moved. Have you seen some other issues out there that relate to personal seat license in that regard?
I'm sure they exist. It's nothing that I've run across directly, or that I'm prepared to discuss. More or less,
Yeah.
Courts have kind of there's when we talk about ticketing issues, there's a host of things that that have been not just necessarily being discussed now with the evolution as technology continues to evolve, and we're seeing first cases of first impression, but these the personal seat license things have been litigated in the courts in the past, and what the courts have generally concluded was the concept that it's a privilege to purchase tickets. It's not necessarily a right to do so, and therefore the ticket sellers, or excuse me, the team or the venue who is the one issuing the tickets, can set the terms up to a certain degree. Obviously there's question there's you have to make sure that there are certain disclosures and things have to be conspicuous when it comes to any sort of binding agreement that is not necessarily negotiated. But courts have generally sided with the team as opposed to the ticket purchaser. The Rams case is kind of an interesting one because of the fact that they moved.
Exactly. It's almost like
you
a
said,
unique situation there, I think.
But it's very much an interesting thing, and I think largely what the courts have determined is people have the ability to choose how they want to spend their money, and if they choose to go this route, there's certain inherent, not necessarily risk, but they sacrifice certain rights if they want to go about it in a if they want to spend their money on purchasing tickets. As callous as that sounds.
Right. Well, awesome. Well, Dan, you got any other ticketing issues you want to jump into?
Yeah, what to do about, we focus so much on bots that I think one of the larger issues that gets lost in the debate are the holds that the venue places on tickets for insiders and industry people. And I think when you study the statistics, less than half of the tickets are actually made available to the public before bots even come into play. Should there be should these practices be limited by law, to have limits placed on the number of holds for insiders, pre-sale, fan club, credit card, Visa, MasterCard, all these pre-sales where when you think about it, it creates this artificial inflated market for those few tickets that are able to get through and get sold to the public. I think we need more wide-ranging regulation of the industry than we already have.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely hits a balance again. I mean, certainly you worry about the general typical consumer who only has access to that, like you mentioned, somewhat inflated marketplace because there's a limited supply. This is my econ major coming into play right now. As supply is more limited, demand becomes higher and prices increase. There you go.
Yep.
It kind of has to be balanced. I mean, how much do you want to interfere with a team that does the way the team conducts its business? Now, understand the reason why. If you're a team, you say we want to put certain holds. We want to be able to offer our tickets to our partners, to executives who we do and conduct business with. That enhances the value of our organization. That is a revenue source. Secondary and distinct from simply purchases from the general public. So it's a market force question.
No, they should disclose it. I'm not suggesting that there be a barrier or a ban or prohibition placed on the practice. But when you're a member of the public, you want to go to a concert or a sporting event, and this big event goes on sale and it's sold out like within 1 minute. That 20,000 tickets weren't sold out in 1 minute. That in all likelihood, only 40% of the tickets were released to the public. Well, that creates in and of itself an artificial barrier, or an artificial inflationary measure. If you knew that, or if you were told that only 40% of the tickets are going to be released for the on sale, you may not be so inclined to pay higher prices on the secondary market, knowing that only 40% of the tickets were ever sold to begin with.
I think that kind of goes full circle to a certain degree with what we're discussing. It is actually factual. The reason why these things get purchased up in a matter of a minute, even when we're talking 20,000 seats, is because of technology, of these ticket bots that allow, this ability to actually, the practical ability for that to occur. So it is difficult. I don't know if it would be much different if there were 60,000 available versus 20. The fact of the matter is, if it's a high demand event, the tickets are going to be bought, and in large part, as of right now, without the enforcement capabilities or the actual enforcement actions, because of these automated processes that allow huge blocks to be purchased in one fell swoop.
Other than issuing press releases, do the state attorney general's offices around the country, particularly in New York, have the resources to combat these types of abuses? I mean, we know that New York's Attorney General Eric Schneiderman put out a pretty deep dive called "Obstructed View: What's Blocking New Yorkers from Getting Tickets?" A report in the latter part of 2016. But has his office been aggressive in going after violators?
That's the question. I know there's been a handful of efforts, but it really is, for practical purposes, it becomes a very costly and difficult type of suit enforcement action to maintain. I mean, it's as simple as, if you have someone sitting at a computer 1,000 miles away, resources are limited on a state level. You may want to enforce it, but to be able to find that person, serve them, and stop their practices before they just come up with a new site, use a different bot, and use a different computer, well, really, is that feasible? You can only really start the deterrent effect. And I think, like I mentioned, to a certain degree, the federal law, bringing it back to the bots law, the reason why it was enacted wasn't necessarily only because of public pressure, but also because having the federal government be able to assist these, cross-state border and provide additional resources, if they have the appetite to do so, of course, will maybe beef up enforcement activities, at least theoretically.
And in the end, nobody cares about the little guy. The promoter gets paid, the artist gets his guarantee, the broker makes their money. Who's out there advocating on behalf of consumers, on behalf of the buying public? Who are their advocates?
Well, that's why these laws exist, because they are consumer protection laws. But unfortunately, even with every consumer protection laws, the effectiveness is still not necessarily as easy as simply stating that it should exist. And I think that's kind of one of the things that we're running across, particularly as technology continues to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it on the head. It really comes down to a resources issue to me. I mean, if we had unlimited resources to enforce these things, I'm sure we could have an extremely fair ticket purchasing market. But how really important of an issue is this?
That's right.
And at the end of the day, we know that the states and federal governments have limited resources, and it's just a matter of allocating them to certain things. And so we'll see. I'm interested to see, what becomes of the Bots Act, whether it was just sort of a law that's thrown out there to scare people that they're never actually going to enforce, or whether they actually, try to invest some resources in enforcing it and prosecuting some cases. Justin, do you think that they will, or what's your thoughts on that?
It's difficult to say. I mean, it was passed at the very end of Barack Obama's term limit. So right. To a certain degree, why would he do it in the face of maybe what you would say public pressure? Well, I guess it's not necessarily him. It comes down to senators who also are probably dealing with their own constituents and may not be term limited. But to a certain degree, why pass it if it was just as a, public save face, or just to show that you're on the side of the little guy, if there is going to be no actual enforcement efforts? Now, whether those enforcement efforts will be effective is a totally different question from even if they're taken. And it's really difficult to predict right now how it's going to play out. Because, right now, this law has been in effect for all of 3 months. So, not even 2 months. It was passed at the very beginning of the new year. So we will certainly find out what will happen in the very near future, I would imagine. But right now, it's still very difficult to predict, because we're still just trying to work through it.
Got it. I think that's a good place for us to put a bow on this conversation, because I think it's an issue that's going to keep proceeding, because technology is never going to stop and the law is going to have to try to keep up. But Justin, thank you very, very much for joining us. That was an enlightening conversation. Dan, do you have any final words as well?
No, I just would like to see more laws and consumer protection measures introduced and enforced. I think this industry and this aspect of the marketplace is so rife with abuse, corruption, and the little guy and the consumers are ultimately bearing the cost, and prices going up, availability is going down, and I think the Bots Act is a measure in the right direction, but I think the industry, I think the marketplace needs more protection. I think the consumers need more protection, and I'm still annoyed by the idea that the arenas can hold back so much of the ticket supply and not have to disclose that and create these artificial markets. So I think eventually, or I guess ultimately, this is going to be left to class action plaintiffs' lawyers to try to ferret out these kinds of abuses and go after people who skirt consumer protections and take advantage through deceptive and unfair trade practices. So I hope to see a little bit more of a revolution taking place in the marketplace for ticketing.
I was about to say I smell a Dan Wallach-led class action in the very near future.
I hope so. I hope somebody brings one, and because that's the last line of defense. If lawmakers and attorney generals are willing to only go so far, maybe it will be up to class action attorneys to do a little bit of social engineering here to protect consumers.
Well,
there we go.
Dan Wallach et al. There you go. Well, Justin, thanks again. We really appreciate it. We're taping on a Friday, so have a awesome weekend. And we didn't mention this earlier, but congratulations on becoming a father, sir.
Thank you very much. I know we were scheduled to do this a month ago, but I'm glad. Better late than never. And I hope I made at least a little bit of sense working on what amounts to about 2.5 hours of sleep.
Well, we should have thrown that at the beginning. It could have been a good caveat for this whole.
We'll see if anyone listens to the very end, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, buddy. Thanks again.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.